to Masterclass Moments Live podcast with Dr. Joel B. Kemp. I am Dr. Kemp, a Christian minister, an occasionally recovering lawyer, a theologian, assistant professor, and your host for Masterclass Moments. This space is a chance for us to have an interactive and spirited discussion where we'll discuss topics and thought-provoking ideas, inspirational moments, and occasionally some controversial discussions, as you saw with how we play Uno. That came up a little bit last time on various topics, some related to Christian faith and life, to biblical Hebrew, to religion, race, social issues, pastoral leadership, and much, much more. From time to time, I'll invite various special guests, friends, and family to join us for our conversations. As always, we begin our time together with our Hebrew word of the day. And today's word is the word goel. Goel. Goel is the word that is often translated into English as redeemer. So we often see it kind of most famously in Job chapter 19, where Job says, "For I surely know that my Redeemer lives, and he will arise and stand upon the earth on that day." It's fun little Hebrew. There's actually upon the dust, literally is what it says, although we understand why we do it upon the earth, but that's a conversation for another day. And thinking about this idea of the goel, the redeemer, made me think about some of our conversations regarding forgiveness and what we want to do our time together today. And part of what a goel does is it's someone who redeems, someone who takes out of debt, particularly when we are in debt and enslaved because of that debt. And certainly in the Christian tradition, we understand that Christ is our redeemer and the one who redeems us from the debt of sin. But it also has other implications about what it means to be rescued when you can't afford to pay the bill that comes due. And the goel is the one who provides that. And so as we dive into our conversation, kind of keep in mind how it is that God as goel is our redeemer and how we then can embody that. And as in the words of the Lord's Prayer, that we can be redeemed on earth as it is in heaven. So as we begin our time, invite my family, the one and only Dr. G, aka Gail Kemp, aka my wife, and my sister in the faith, the Reverend Dr. Dominique Robinson. How are you both?
Well, it is a pleasure and joy to be here with you again.
Yes.
Oh, I'm good and so ready to cut up already.
Ha, 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 ha. Uno wars and cereal wars ensue.
All of the things, all of the things.
Right.
I'm glad to be here. Dr. Kemp, Joel Kemp. We can't go any further because I need all of the people who are watching to let us know where they're watching from because we had a lot of chatter last time and I just need to know who will be addressing us. So if you are watching us on the stream, we're asking for you to drop where you are watching from, just so we know if we talk trash where we will not find you.
Right,
Right. You're watching. Chat us in, share it. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you, share it with someone, tag someone who likes to talk trash over a spades game, tag someone who likes to follow the actual instructions in the Uno box given to us. Tag someone who just learned how to play dominoes or something. Oh, Nancy's back. Thank you. Nancy's back. We got Jasmine from Boston. Where Dominique's awesome frames. Oh, you know what? Yeah, they're not on my desk for me to grab them. And you can tell that I'm leaning in to read the
Right.
names. And that's
Right.
a lesson. We got Stoneham, Massachusetts as well on the line. And as we continue to move forward, listen, Dr. G came on the line a little fancy today out here with this new hairstyle. And for all the black girl magic out here, we out here, we see you out here. And we just want you to know that we see you and appreciate you with this crown of glory out here.
Exactly.
I do what I can. Gotta spice up the professorial look, right? Gotta keep people on their toes, Can't just come any old common way.
A common, that's it. Help the people. You can't
Right.
cut it in any old common way.
Right.
Right.
And
Now,
it's
and
fitting
be
if you have
clear.
parfait for cereal, you have to have a hairdo to match, right?
Ah, I see. I see. Is this the parfait style? Should I tell my stylist
Oh
we're gonna
my
call this one parfait?
That, listen, and the people on the line have said, and we love the hair. That's right. You have to be like, oh, we see you, sis, out here with the hair. And you're right, especially as a Black female professor, switching it up on the people of God, letting them know that this, and sometimes you can know the type of energy you're going to get from a Black woman based off of our hair. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
So
right.
be clear. If you ever find me with my hair pushed up in a ponytail, don't come asking me no questions, everybody. Because my hair appointment, I haven't made it to my hair appointment. I'm mad.
Right. Right. There you go. Exactly. Exactly. We got to make do sometimes. It's like, you know what? It didn't quite fit in the schedule. So what I got to do to make this work?
Absolutely. I need to ask both of you this question. Have you all seen the commercial for Raisin Bran Crunch with the gentleman packing his suitcase?
No.
No, I haven't seen
What
it.
is what happens in the
Right.
commercial? It made you think of the Kemps.
Right.
Well, no, it wasn't that. It was what was considered the razzle dazzle along with the Raisin Bran.
Okay.
He was celebrating the fact that he ate a healthy meal, or one of the best cereals, as you all would say, for breakfast. I cannot remember if it was Raisin Bran or Raisin Bran Crunch, but same family right now.
Right.
A part of it is after he finished eating, it was like the meal of champions that he was able to successfully, properly pack his to carry on suitcase without issues or concern. And they showed this picture of his suitcase. Bruce Lee said, "Not again." Yes, Bruce, we are addressing this.
Right.
I'm clear that nobody's going to change, but we need to just at least talk about the celebration of Raisin Bran right now.
That's the first step, right? When there's a problem, is addressing it, acknowledging it. That's step one.
And so they show like the camera shoots over to his suitcase. It's open and everything's laid perfectly flat with no issue. So he's easily able to like close the bag. Shoes are on one side, toiletries in a special case. And I was like, Raisin Bran did this? Right. That's the cause of this great organization and ease of packing was Raisin Bran. Right. So I wanted to know if y'all saw that commercial. Now,
no, gotta have to take a look out for that.
Right, but it does feel like it's the great gospel of Raisin Bran, right? That it gives you. What are the benefits of Raisin Bran? It orders your life, right?
Oh no! And now I have a song in my head, but I don't want to. I don't want to go there. Order my steps. Okay. No. We're not gonna remix "Order My Steps" and turn it into. We're gonna leave the song as it is. We'll resist all urge.
Dr. Gail's hair is so pretty. I'm a little jealous that her curls are perfect and not frizzled out like mine. And humidity. Listen, out here, she does look like she. Now, I don't know if y'all know Lotto. She does like rip me off the plastic. I've been acting brand new. That's it. Y'all don't have to go to the further lyrics for that line right there.
Right.
Give you my stylist number. I'm gonna next time I talk to her, I'm like, hey, I got a lot of love. You did the
love it. We love to see it. And I just feel like for me, when I get my hair done again, that I feel like my skin clears up for whatever reason. It might be psychological. I just feel like you can see my skin a little better when my edges are laid. But that, I'll talk about that in therapy next week. We'll process that later.
This is a safe space here. This is a safe space.
Right, exactly.
Safe space. Oh, well, we talk what Melissa has talked about Raisin Bran to the rescue. That's exactly how that was presented. Raisin Bran to the rescue. I want to talk about for 2 seconds. Okay. Those of you who've been following the podcast, have been engaging us on social media. Have y'all seen people's responses to the Masterclass social media page, Instagram page, Just Enough Lights, sharing about the games from Uno to Spades? Have y'all seen the people of God have gotten a little spicy in our social media, on our social media platforms, as if the way they play is the only way?
Yes, I have seen, and I think the one I paid attention to was the one that supported our view, which is something that we call confirmation bias in psychology. And so I'm just leaning in and choosing that there was, a chorus of agreement with us.
Do you want to just for newcomers, what exactly was your stance that people are supporting?
Right. So there's a question about, do you stack, which means if you have, say, like 4 sevens of different colors, can you put them all down at the same time, or can you only put a red 7 on top of another red number?
Right. So, or just put one at a time until like your turn is just one down.
Right.
Jasmine, this is why I wanted them to clarify, because you over here talking about something, because it is stacking is the only way. Choose this day.
Ah,
Right. She got biblical on us.
right.
So I just wanted you to know, because I feel like we might have had a divide on where we landed on how we
We did. We did not settle. We did not settle it. We did not come to agreement. This was not a. This was we didn't touch and agree. It was.
Right.
We touched and agreed. So Jasmine, I just wanted you to know you have now identified yourself on my camp, and be careful moving forward, because
You'll expect all loyalty, right?
I was gonna say the Kemp followers are very loyal out here. They're worse than the Beehive and the Barbie out here.
So we'll just make it clear when we ever gather in person what the rules are.
Right.
So that way,
Right.
no one gets offended. No one gets cut.
Right. Period. Here go. Oh, now you got your little student out here, Tyriana Harris out here talking trash. Ty, we don't even know what side we out here.
Hey, Ty. Right.
Ty, on. Ty, are you?
I know, right? What is the we out? What are we out here with?
We are you stacking? Are you?
Come on, Ty. Come to the Kemp side. Come to the Kemp side.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
Right. So the drama builds.
Right. Exactly.
It is. It just continues to build. At least we're not worried about that when it comes to spades. You're throwing one card out. Oh, Ty is on the stacking side.
Oh, Ty.
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna go pray for you now.
Oh, wow. It was your utter disgusting. Oh, Ty. It was just like, oh, wow.
I had a modicum of hope.
It's all love. It's all love.
Oh, Ty, you have gravely disappointed Dr. Gail Kemp, and I want you to get you need to go to God. Oh, she said I lost my spot in the favorites. Exactly.
Now I have another niece coming in. No, I'm just kidding. No. Your spot is secure. Your niece's spot is secure.
Right.
No,
stacking in spades. Oh.
No, I don't know anything about stacking in spades.
Yeah.
Wait, what? Stacking in spades? What is this? Nonsense and tomfoolery that we're talking about here.
No, Bruce.
You went to nonsense.
Stacking. Explain yourself.
No. I think he's making sure I didn't say that.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. All right.
Bruce, I was saying we are divided on Uno, but we are on the same side on spades, because spades does not permit and allow for it. Which brings me to one of my first questions. I did ask you two if you've ever been partners before, but let's talk about playing spades. Do you quickly forgive a partner if they renege?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. Because
it depends.
At the end of the day, you know what? I can have fun with it. I can trash talk, but it is truly like I am playing a game. It is not. It doesn't touch sort of deep recesses of my sense of self. So I can let it go pretty easily. Right. I might clown the person, but it's playing. It's playful.
Yeah, it's playful for me. So like my life isn't on the line if you renege, but for me, make sure you
don't do it.
Right, but make sure you do it accidentally, not intentionally. Like I hate when people try to like sneak things in and be like, well, let me see if I can cut spades early or break spades early by cutting clubs when I have two clubs in my back pocket. Like if you do it accidentally, I'm good. If you try to do it subtly, kind of on a sneak tip, then I get a little perturbed, as they say.
Well, back in the day, I might have. I'm not saying I did anything like that intentionally, but I, if you ask my sisters, sometimes I did have some creative ways of playing games that were sort of actually me just messing with my sisters and trying to see how long it took them to notice what I was doing. So one day you could ask them about the infamous Monopoly game.
Oh gosh, you play around with Monopoly. Okay,
if you're the bank.
I feel like as a psychologist, I should not answer this question.
No, but
I was a child.
Please tell us.
Childish thing.
But we want to know, because Nancy has admitted that once my family was playing Uno game that would not end. So my brother sneakily put down a 9 saying it was a 6. Let it slide so we can go to bed. See, you said creative ways. So I'm trying to figure out how do you
Well, first of all, let me contextualize this with I was in junior high school. Okay, so let's start there, like age. So this wasn't last year. This wasn't last 10 years. I was playing with my sister who lives in New Jersey now, and we were playing at a park with one of her. I think it was her boyfriend of hers and somebody else, some folk we were playing with. And I was the youngest one there. They kind of like let me tag along as like the little kid to hang out. So maybe I was a little bitter, but in any case, I was the banker. And so I just skimmed a little off the top with every round. Like literally every round I took extra from the bank. And I just would take more and more because I was just amused. I was like, they haven't noticed yet. They haven't noticed yet. And then finally, when they caught on to what I was doing, they like, were outraged. Oh my God, I can't believe you did this. And then I just took off running. It was all fun. It was so much fun.
Fun that required forgiveness to play with you again.
Right. I'll have to ask my sister. Like, have you
Forgiving me for
right.
some off the top.
Right.
The Monopoly banking. Well, we thank God that you've gone into this field.
Right.
And,
right.
You know, embezzlement, clutching on pearls. Melissa just said embezzlement.
Melissa, I was in junior high. No judgment. Come on.
It's the beginning of the banking crisis in America.
We didn't set the ground rules for no judgment upon.
No, I said this was a safe space.
Okay, well.
All right, fine. Judge away.
Consent. I don't know if consent was given to this safe space. No, I'm not. It is a safe space, but I'm going to clown that for a little while.
All right, go ahead.
Melissa has called it embezzlement. We got Maurice on here saying, what up, fam? What up?
Hey.
And Bruce indeed was making sure that we were not talking about stacking.
Okay.
In spades. You make sure that it's not what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Bruce was about to have a fit.
God in them. I'm upset for a day or two. Exactly, Jasmine. So I was going to go back to this. I do not forgive easily if my partner reneges in the spades game. I feel like you have not been paying attention. You've drank too much. You over here talking too much. You need to pay attention to the game. I'm competitive and you reneging. Now we both are looked at like liars because you reneged in the game. So Jasmine has said she's upset for a day or two at least.
Okay. How long is it for you? And how long before you'll play with the person again?
Oh, I'm not.
Okay.
One and done.
One and done.
I'm not. And we will talk a bit more about this later on when we start digging a little bit more. You all know we're picking up on forgiveness and talking about that a little bit more. I am very clear. This is one of the things I wrestle with the most in my Christian journey. And it comes up a lot in my therapy sessions around why I don't function or exercise forgiveness in particular ways. And so I'm glad you all asked. So I was like, I'm not. No, you renege one time. I don't even know if I'm gonna finish the game, depending on what has happened.
It's over.
It's over. Yeah, somebody come get her. Cousin Buki talking too much. I want my aunt to play. I'm sick of it.
Right.
I'm not playing with them anymore.
Game over, literally at that moment.
That's it. And so therefore, you all now know at the family gatherings, I am the dramatic one at the table. Okay.
No. So got to do one other quick game thing.
Oh.
Bid whist.
Okay. Wait, are you going to ask your question? Other people?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Dr. J. Ask your question.
So, like, when you do bid whist, you have the standard uptown, then you have the downtown. Has anyone else heard of Midtown?
Who didn't learn about it from Dr. J?
Right.
Who learned about it independently from him? We have taken surveys.
Oh my gosh, I wish Dr. Fry Brown. I'm gonna have to text her. What is this? What is it? Sidetown? Downtown.
I like it. I think that's exactly how he came up with it.
Right.
I think he did a more creative version of my Monopoly. He got a rough hand one game and said, "Hey, listen, y'all, it's Midtown." No, didn't you tell Dr. T about that once?
I thought I mentioned it to her.
This is Midtown in Bid Whist or in Monopoly?
In Bid Whist.
Yeah. So tell them what Midtown is.
So I swore up and down I was taught this, but everyone is like, "Nah, I learned it from you." So I just want to make sure that I invent something that I didn't realize I invented.
I think you did, and you should take credit for it.
Right. So if I did invent it, I get to take credit for it here on JEL Masterclass Moments Live podcast.
There you go.
So you get a really bad hand and we don't have very many face cards or anything. So in Midtown, you start at the center of the deck and that becomes the high card.
That's the best
card.
So
you do 7, then 8, then 6, 9, 5, 10, 4, Jack, 3, Queen, 2, King, Ace. So that the lowest card you have is the Ace. And the highest card you have is a 7. Not counting if you have any jokers.
What's that meme of the person with all the numbers spinning around and mathematical equations? Yeah. So that was it. It's a fun bid.
Right.
But you do need a cheat sheet. I needed a cheat sheet when he told me about that.
Right. So it's always one of those things. I saw Ty was like, Dr. J taught me. and Inez was like pioneer. So one of the things that I was trying to figure out, was it really something that I came up with? And I remember asking my dad, who taught me how to play. He was like, "What's this nonsense?"
Yep.
So,
Asked my dad too, and we were playing with him, and then he was just like, "What is this that y'all making up?" But then the next hand, he turns to Joel and says, "Tell me about that Midtown thing again."
Right.
He was ready to play it because he had some 6s and 7s. He wanted to play it.
Exactly. Like everyone mocks it the first time, then about halfway through the game, then you're like, all right, so what was that rule again?
Yep.
So
what? Okay, hold on. I have a question for later. We'll get to Mega Church, which has called. Oh, all right, Nancy, we'll get to that. That certainly is gonna. I think it's being called now a redirect. That's gonna be a redirect question. Ma is on the line. Nikki, I don't know. I didn't learn BitWiz. I don't know if you know it, but have you ever heard of this Midtown situation? I can't tell if it's urban or suburban, but have you ever heard of this Midtown situation? Only for those who can count. Exactly. Yes. Okay, Inez. Only for those who can count.
Right.
Now you're a whole inventor out here. Those were not the rules. Dr. Kemp, you might need to go ahead and trademark that before
you need to trademark it.
Right.
I think so.
Before it shows up somewhere randomly.
Mm-hmm.
But were you already a practicing attorney when you came up with these rules?
No.
You were like in college, right?
I was in college, yeah.
Good.
End of college, beginning of law school. So
I was going to be a little nervous. I was going to be like, well, you know what they say about attorneys and you coming up with these rules.
Right. Exactly. That's the recovering lawyer from time to time. Mm-hmm. But no, this was probably my junior, senior year in college. You know, when you reach that point in your academic career where you really spend way too much time in dining halls, not enough time studying. And so that was that BidWiz moment where, again, in my mind, I was like, I swore I learned it from somewhere, but apparently people keep pointing back to me. So I may have to own. It's not embezzlement, though, so no pearls have to be clutched.
Oh, wow.
So how I brought that back.
You see how quickly that bus came around.
No,
I was not ready. I did not have my bus pass out. I had nothing ready for that one.
In this very moment, this is the moment that I need people to know. Black people have a way of employing humor, petty shade, playing the dozens. It's like you do it to people you love. So you can't imagine our trash talking to somebody we don't like. Like we say stuff to people we love, and the man of God quickly. He didn't even let us go. We haven't even healed from the embezzlement accusation or term, and he immediately was like, "Well, it's not embezzlement."
Exactly.
Whoa.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
And for all of the students who thinks Dr. Kemp is just this neat bow tie man of God and not bow tie wearing who, doesn't, say anything crazy or slick. You just heard it right here. You heard it, right? You heard it right here.
Right. Now, as I joke with students, like Dr. Kemp was one person, Brother Joel's a different kind.
And then there's Attorney Kemp. He's talking out here like Jay. That's how he's talking. He was like, he wasn't embezzlement.
Right, exactly. Throwing his whole wife under the bus, too. Like, wow.
Right.
It's all love, knocking on the door. You're like, is she the one? No, I'm just kidding.
No. Reason stands that if you can make new rules in one game, stacking could be the norm in another one.
Honestly, I was thinking that. I was literally thinking that. I was like, you don't really have a leg to stand on to not stack with that one. But also, you didn't know that you made it up. So there's that.
Right. Exactly.
And
ignorance,
also,
right?
Yeah. And I feel like if you made up something with Uno, you'd probably stick with that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Jasmine, did you see how quickly they came together right after he just said at least it wasn't embezzlement? Immediately they both like, oh no, because actually it's not the same. We talking about this is not apples and apples. This is apples and oranges.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
That's how it works.
Exactly. That's how marriage works.
That's how it works right there.
I mean, just wow. And then you go, Ty, talk woman in the face. Don't Ty, you're trying to get back into good graces with Kim. You might want to pull back.
You know what? I think Ty, we okay now.
Oh gosh. I don't know if she's saying yes to you or to Jasmine. That's why you got to watch her.
I don't know. This
is why forgiveness is necessary because you got to watch people like Ty, right? Because you got to ask, what side are you on here? Right? You probably need to be on the side with the Kemps who are more forgiving.
Now Ty's like, how am I all up in this so much?
Get on my side. You won't exist after one mess up. See, this is why it's terrible to be a Christian expecting forgiveness and unable to practice it and exercise. Right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into forgiveness. We talked. Ty said, "Don't drag me, baby. You don't drag yourself. You have decided you grabbed yourself by your collar and came down.
Oh,
So,
right,
so-
right.
and you know what's going to happen? The Kemps are going to pick you up and put you back together again. You
We
know,
got
the
you,
Potter
Tom.
wants. See, since Dr. G started with songs, one of my steps, here I am. The Potter wants to put you back together again.
There you go.
There you
So, all right, this is my funny question before we dive into the seriousness of it. You all know, listening, tuning in, tag somebody. We've been having some really, really rich, heavy conversations around forgiveness, challenging, complex, no black and white, no pun intended, but lots of gray areas. But here's my one funny question before we move into it. I don't even know if you can answer this one, but most embarrassing funny moment as professor.
Ooh.
I was going to say professor or preacher, but professor or public speaking moment. Look at both of y'all thinking.
Right. Most embarrassing moment.
But funny. It doesn't like
Yeah.
not embarrassing and terrifying.
Right. That's a really good question.
That is a good question. I'm sure I have one. I
Yeah.
have to ask my students. I'm like, hey, what have I?
Right. Oh, okay.
What you got?
The moment for me, gosh, I was still finishing my PhD and I was teaching at Boston College. And so like so much of students, faculty, we get a roster that says, hey, your classes meet such and such a time in such and such a room. That was wrong, the information I got. So I show up in this large lecture hall, and it's supposed to be, my class was supposed to be about 35 people, and it's like 50 in the classroom. So immediately, you know, alarm bell should have gone off, like, bro, you in the wrong classroom. But I was like, okay, maybe they just got roster change, what have you. So I start plugging in, and then the students start taking out their textbooks, and it's multivariable calculus. And so I was like, so one of us is in the wrong place. So then I quickly, you know, get on my cell phone, figure out, and then they put out a new schedule that morning. And so the professor was supposed to teach multivariable calculus was in my classroom trying to teach Hebrew Bible, and I was in his class. So we quickly texted, changed, and as we're walking out of the classroom, we just kind of look at each other and laugh and just keep it moving. So that's the most embarrassing. So now I always start every class by saying, hope everyone is here for whatever the subject is.
Right.
Oh, wow. Well, at least you weren't embarrassed by yourself. And now it seems like you take a little privilege to say, and if you're not here for this class, you leave. I'm not moving.
There you go.
Right.
If this is the wrong classroom, it doesn't matter. I'm teaching Hebrew here today. So if you are, if that's what it's...
So yes, that's probably my most embarrassing moment. That's funny.
Well, I'm sure there's something, but I'm drawing a blank, so I'm gonna have to think on that one a little more.
Okay. All right. I have a sermon one that I think is more funny than a professor one. My professor one was just not a grave error. It was a moment. I currently teach at a school. You all know majority of the population are white students. And I did have one black student in my class. And in the middle of a white student explaining something to me, I had no idea what that student was talking about. I turned around and looked at the black student and said, do you know what they're talking about? Is this a black thing or a white thing? And realized you are the professor.
Right.
But it was a very valid question. I'm like, I'm confused. Is this what
Right.
Have you heard of this? And I was like, oh no, come back. So that's my right now most embarrassing professor moment. My students might have a different story.
Right.
All right, well,
I'll get back to you on that one. I'll take a race tag. I want an extension on my assignment.
Right.
Look, everyone in the chat, hold her accountable. She might not think of it today, but the next time we do our live, maybe we'll make sure she remembers to do it, or record a video and post it on social media.
Oh gosh, record the story.
Live on in eternity. Yes.
Wow.
Oh man. So we're talking about forgiveness. We're picking up. I think we're on like section 3 or 4 of the conversation, because it's kind of been a common thread in a lot of it, coming past the ways we celebrated Juneteenth as we are approaching July 4th. Many persons, no matter kind of their vocations or fields that they're in, using this time as like a break or, summer vacation, things of that nature, moving into places where I would think most of us pause and reflect on the fact that we have a half of a year left. In the pausing and reflection, it is always very, I wouldn't say easy, but it could tend to be easy to point out how others have done you wrong, or how things are not right. And we immediately go into, or what I've been seeing as a kind of trend or fad of, then what are you doing to choose your peace, right? And how you're coming back to self and remembering self. And a lot of times people put a lot of work into, it's discipline, it's consistency, it's all these things where there is something underneath all of that, when it comes to reconciling with self and with others and with community, that I don't think we spend enough time talking about. But this podcast, this conversation, this platform has, and it's that of forgiveness, which requires an honesty, an honest assessment, a confession, even of alt and or offense, a vulnerability to even admit pain or hurt or harm, or grief of a loss of a relationship thing. So I feel like it requires all of those things. And then the courage is what we've been kind of tapping on, the courage of what it means to move on, which doesn't always mean reconciliation, but for peace. We believe forgiveness plays an essential role, as we talk about moving on in any capacity or way. So Dr. Kemp's, Dr. J, and Dr. G, what would you offer? What would you think would be some steps for forgiveness? Y'all, the people listening and tuning in, here's the question I'm going to pose to y'all. You can put it in there. We, the three of us, to decide this question was kind of heavy, but we're going to just put it out there. It was the question of like, what was the hardest thing for you to forgive of someone you love that you're still in relationship with? Like you're in great relationship with them right now, but something occurred that you had to forgive them for and of. The reason why that question came to me, because I thought whatever was done to get back in a place of those steps, even if you never get back into reconciliation with whomever else, but whatever steps I feel like we had to take to forgive or overcome an offense or alt done by someone that we love and are still in relationship with, I think those steps are worthy of repeating in other relationships, if for consideration purposes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that we talked about in our last podcast that really was critical for me was that conversation that we had about healing first, and kind of healing needing to occur before really trying to force forgiveness or experience forgiveness. Is that was a necessary first step.
You did. And Dr. G, if you can just unpack that a little bit, because you got a lot of hits on the live when I think the statement you made was that if we focused on our healing first, that forgiveness will be a byproduct.
Yeah.
So I think you got a lot of hits on that. You want to kind of unpack that a little bit more for people to understand what you meant by that, because we were stuck last time. There was so much to chew on, but I remember that statement just resonating heavily with our viewers.
Yeah, that's something Dr. J and I have talked a lot about, and also one of the Bible studies that we participated in for years, of reflecting on that. I think the phrase that we would often quote is healing as a sort of forgiveness as a fruit of healing, and that then we talked about how that kind of changed the way in which we viewed forgiveness. I know personally, I definitely before that tended to view it as something I had to work up. I had to kind of, I just had to work harder to do it. I had to muster up enough kind of power and just do it on my own, as opposed to receiving from God healing of the pains, the hurts, first, as a necessary first step, which also requires acknowledging, facing them, and really being open, open in prayer and safe community and therapy,
right?
All within that context. Dr. J.
Yeah, because I think part of the challenge often becomes forgiveness is sometimes taught as, if you don't do it, that's a deficit in your faith. It's a deficit in your relationship with Christ. And by flipping it, by making the emphasis on healing first, it takes the pressure off of you, right? So where forgiveness is not able to be granted, assuming it's an appropriate context for it, right? Which is one of the other things we talked about, of forgiveness is being asked to bear too much weight, which it's not designed to do. So if forgiveness is appropriate, then the question for me is, where I find myself not willing or able to forgive, does that mean there's a pain, a hurt that still has to be healed? So therefore I take that pain or that question back to God. And as Dr. G mentioned, that can take the form, like I often use the example of God's hand versus God's glove. And so God's glove might be a therapist. God's glove might be your church community. God's glove might be family. God's glove might be any number of support groups. But again, it is God's hand in it and working. So how God then chooses to heal, that's the foundation, the soil out of which the fruit of forgiveness springs. And that's kind of what we try to emphasize.
Yeah. And one of the things that kind of helped me on my own personal journey is that I was going to churches that were kind of like, they were almost commanding you to forgive. And that very description that you talked about, this idea of like, okay, if you don't, like, come up here and do it. And I'd respond to the tearful response to the altar calls, like, oh, I did it, I forgave. And then, something happened, and conversation and in an interaction, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, there's that the anger and hurt still seems to be there, but I thought I worked this out. I thought I did what I was supposed to do. And that reality of the need for healing first was definitely critical for me.
I need to highlight two things before I go to my follow-up question to you all. Two things that, first of all, the viewers, are y'all seeing this? We do not get to see what people often call, quote unquote, equally yoked Black marriages. And it is giving, I'm just proud, joy, and love. Like, one, I just need y'all, are y'all hearing the answers that these two wonderful scholars are offering who are married? And you have heard literally the both of them rooted in scripture and word in such a way as an individual that also makes them even more powerful as a couple. So first, I'm just celebrating Black love, excellence, intelligence, and spiritual rootedness that we are displaying here on this platform that we don't get often and we don't see. So thank you for both. Just you being yourselves already displaying that. Secondly, listen, Dr. J. Kemp, we almost had a Hammond organ over here. You can't say God's glove and not expect the people. I muted myself so that I didn't have a Baptist fit, a Pentecostal moment, because I said I had never considered that distinction. And in my mind, I don't know. I thought, because, a good preacher run, I thought you was going to go, God's glove is this, God's glove.
He got a sermon on that. He's preached a sermon on that, Dom. So, if you ever want to,
listen, we're going to broadcast it for the people on the socials, okay? Because I feel like good Negro preachers on this line think you're going to steal it. I'm going to tell you where you got it from, okay? So, and then I thought you were going to go on this run of like, God's hand is this, God's hand is this. But you cut us so short. But deep is when you said, but God's hand is in all of it. I said, oh, because God's hand does go in the glove. Like, what in the world? That said, please make sure we share that sermon. So, Dr. G, please help us so that we can make sure we share that.
If we have it on, I don't think we have a recording of it.
What?
But that just means Dr. J should
preach it again, huh? I'll make sure that invitation is extended, man of God. We'll find a check.
I don't mean to be volunteering you for
You're not volunteering him. You're equally yoked.
Right.
The two are one, so therefore, if I agree to something on his behalf, then
therefore it's binding, right?
Yes. So my follow-up question is going to get to, Melissa said, rewind. Yes, right. My follow-up question is going to get to something that two people put in our chat for us. One, my aunt Nicole Robinson said that she had to forgive herself and reconcile with herself. Yes. And so you both have been talking about what it means to focus on one's healing as a primary framework or way to work through or get to forgiveness in such a way. And so I love how, Dr. J, you said if forgiveness is appropriate, which means is we're going to talk about these contexts that matter. But one of the greatest things that matters when or works is that when we're doing it for ourselves, the healing, I don't know if anybody would stop and say, I don't deserve forgiveness for myself, like where it's not appropriate for self. And so in working through and practicing those steps of forgiveness of self, I feel like that the putting healing first it's the journey that does allow you to do that first before you start worrying about anybody else. Now, absolutely. Dr. G, you talked about being in a church that made it seem like forgiveness was the only way, an absolute immediate response or reaction that we had to do, like it's required. And Dr. J adds weight to it literally when he says it means to take on more than one can bear or supposed to bear. It gets to Nancy's question. It's a two-part question. But she discussed, she names a particular church. I have a question for later. I watched the docuseries on Hillsong Church. like plenty of other docuseries that are kind of out now showing, and this one displayed a mega church where it's done some terrible things. But she says that she noticed a manipulative tool that these faith leaders would use when they would get busted in abusing people or real embezzlement, y'all, not the monopoly embezzlement, but that they would use like the redemption arc. And so she was asking, how do we help ourselves to decipher between true redemption from manipulation, the way that forgiveness could be weaponized and or used to shame us as if our faith, is impacted by that. So can you two talk a bit about either one of those concepts, this demand of forgiveness, the arcs, and I think that gets into the things that we said we would share for today.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, I think, on the question of redemption, manipulation, part of it is, what is the purpose of the redemption, which to me helps discern its sincerity. What I mean by that is, and again, this will be very Baptist, quasi-reformed tradition of me. In my own life, when I have been convicted of sin and had, as the Apostle Paul talks about, that godly sorrow that leads to repentance, I lose all senses of entitlement. I lose all senses of, oh, God's going to give me back better than what I had. Because at that moment, I realized there is absolutely nothing within me that merits God's love, God's grace, God's favor. And so there is no end I have in mind when I am convicted of sin.
Right.
And my redemption has nothing to do with my public face.
Right.
It has everything to do with the private me. And so for me, I'm always skeptical when people have this story where I sinned, I repented, and God blessed me richly. Because what I often don't hear in those narratives is that godly sorrow, right?
That part.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally that part. That's exactly what it was immediately kind of coming to mind, is you can recognize godly sorrow. Godly sorrow doesn't leave someone in a place demanding more from others.
Yes.
And demanding something emotional from others, demanding something like you have failed because you haven't forgiven. That's not true godly sorrow. That's not that sorrow doesn't produce fruit meet for repentance.
Yeah.
And what's the distinction you both would say between the godly sorrow or remorse?
For me, godly sorrow has two components that are different, right? For me, remorse simply means I'm sorry I got caught.
Yes.
Mm.
It's self-focused.
Yes.
Yeah. Ooh.
Right. And so, to turn it a little bit to one of the other things we'll talk about, just to plant the seed, that to me is part of the issues with how racism is addressed in America.
Wow.
Too often the repentances or the godly sorrows are, I got caught. It's not, I have done harm.
Right. I'm sorry if I offended.
Right. That's not repentance.
Ooh.
And so part of...
Wait, no, that's not repentance. Remorse, y'all.
Yes, that's remorse. Yes.
Yeah.
And so part of, one of the things that Dr. G and I were talking about, I guess it was last week.
Yeah.
On our route to work, if we go the local route, you drive through various communities, and the contrast socioeconomically and racially is stark. And one of the things that we talked about is, if we're going to really deal with systemic racism and have kind of real godly repentance, real godly sorrow, then the narrative cannot be, look at what happens to those poor Black folk. We should help them. Godly sorrow says, we as those who have traded in and benefit from the lies of white supremacy, look at what we have done. Right? The crack addict outside the check cashing place is a sin that I have done. Until that's the narrative that I hear from my white brothers and sisters, the forced forgiveness, the forced racial reconciliation conferences, to me will ring hollow.
Right, right. And that focus, that sorrow, has to be, I've sinned before God,
Yes.
not my bad.
Right.
I'm sorry that you were bothered by this, or even I can't believe I did something so horrible. But no, do you have that moment where you feel you smiled, Dr. J?
Yeah. The Luke passage.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, what's
Where
the passage for the people of God?
where uh, Jesus tells Peter, "You're going to deny me," and then he spells out exactly how it's going to happen. You're going to hear the cock, it's going to crow, and then there's that passage that where Jesus catches Luke's eye.
Right.
And I can just envision, like, you read it and you can, I just get a feeling of Peter's heart breaking.
Right.
Hmm.
When Jesus catches his eye, and everything Jesus said he would do, when Peter like vehemently denied, "I'll never deny you. I'll ride or die with you." That moment when Jesus catches his eye, right, and it's a detail that only Luke has.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So you have to speak on that one. I don't remember
Uh-oh.
what you said about that.
Uh-oh.
At some point, maybe not now, but
Right. But I think it's part of, right, Luke is getting at, I think, what Nancy's question was, of that manipulative arc and how to break it, right? Because when Peter has that, he breaks. And the next time we see Peter, he's not saying, "Jesus, about time you recognized your boy," right? There's
right,
absolute abject horror
right.
at what he did
Mm.
and how that affected God.
Mm.
Right. And so it's not the sense of, I disappointed myself. And for me, so often the godly sorrow versus remorse. In remorse, I hear a lot of, "I disappointed myself," image of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's redundant, but I want to emphasize the
The self-focus,
self-image.
right?
Right. And to me, when I've had those genuine moments of conviction, my image of myself is not on the line. It's not even in the equation.
Mm.
And that to me is what I would say in partial response to Nancy's question.
Right. And this is powerful. So Nancy absolutely said, thank you for such a powerful questions, because again, Nancy, what I believe both Dr. Kemps are highlighting is this nuancing again of the direction of who, not the attention is on, but who is the accountability and responsibility. So you're talking about faith leaders and the ways in which they've used their own rhetoric to be able to gain quick forgiveness to keep moving on, because in essence, that's what has played a role for the systems that kept hiding what they were doing. They use their own rhetoric to be able to kind of do that. But this same framework that the Kemps have highlighted for us on the remorse distinction versus godly sorrow piece of this separation of self and identification is also a piece we pull into if we start talking about what does it mean then to forgive white people who are my colleagues from a evils that are occurring connected to whiteness. How do I navigate life and exercise forgiveness around that? So talk to us a bit about the lies of white supremacy and a relationship to forgiveness and us interacting in life today in real life society as Black and white folk.
Right. Yeah. I think this is one of those times where I want to take forgiveness out of the conversation, because to me, this is a moment where forgiveness is being asked to bear weight it's not designed to do.
Yeah.
Right. So that there's a difference between kind of interpersonal forgiveness and then the fighting against systemic oppression.
Right.
Right. So that scripture, from best of my knowledge, never tells us to forgive systems, to never reconcile ourselves with ungodly systems. It does tell us to be in a place where we can forgive individuals as they come to us individually. And so I think that's one of those cases where I'm not to forgive whiteness and the lies of white supremacy. But if there's a white brother or sister who has that godly sorrow, then in that relationship, I would say forgiveness is on the table.
Mhm.
And then we can begin having a conversation both internally about, again, am I healed, etc., where they're coming from, and discern how to have a relationship moving forward in that context. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of those things we have to think about for those who have been tools of harm. When they come to us, is it that manipulative art that we just discussed, or is it that real godly sorrow where forgiveness is appropriate?
Mhm.
Thought you want
Yeah.
to say something?
And one of the things that in our conversation where we were reflecting on this, and I yield to the biblical scholar in the room, in the virtual room, but we were in basically raised the question of, can we think of a time where scripture tells someone to forgive and like a nation or forgive a group? Like, is Israel ever told to forgive the Egyptians? Was the, that this was
Right.
so this was part of when in our conversation where we were just like, okay, so are we asking forgiveness to do more work than it's for, than its purpose is? Again, doesn't need to remain in that interpersonal domain and not in that domain that perhaps you could say then that systemic racism, systemic oppression is more associated with the principalities and powers.
And this is rich. Are we to or called or required to forgive when the pain is still being inflicted?
Again, I think this is one of those moments where the word forgive to me is, I
Mhm.
want to take it out of our vocabulary in these
Right.
moments,
Okay.
right? So that for me, this is an example of what we talked about a little bit in our last live about not letting the bitter root or root of bitterness take hold.
Right.
So that's what I am required to do when the pain is being inflicted.
Right.
There's a great quotation. I'll defer
Yeah.
to Dr. G because
I
about
have it right here.
okay,
We were listening to it on a drive recently.
yeah,
This was from, let me get the exact Sheila Wise Rowe in her text Healing Racial Trauma. And what she said, and we love this quote, is that kind of holding on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And so we both thought that was a very powerful example. I think while the harm is still going on, there's not an opportunity for um, an act isn't over. So how can one forgive an incompleted harm that's still in the midst of occurring? But what one can do is guard against that root of bitterness, and that is really what we see as the one of the key factors from psychology literature: the bitterness, the rage, the anger that's associated with negative both mental and physical health outcomes.
Right, 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 right,
yeah. And so I think
right.
the challenge is sort of changing our vocabulary to hopefully begin changing our mindsets on this, so that particularly in American racialized contexts, and I think we talked about this either on the last live or in the podcast that we dropped on Juneteenth, of this idea of, white assault, black forgiveness, we all move on happily ever after. And that is a death dealing cycle for everyone that's involved. And so part of what I would hope some of these conversations will help us begin to think about is the cycle isn't harm forgiveness,
Mhm.
it's harm healing
Mhm.
and insulation. Then from that, we can talk about how we deal with the problem that's causing the pain.
Mm.
But again, if you're being harmed, right, you can't be whole while being harmed.
Mm.
Right.
And are we seeking healing? Like, is racism person or principality? Like what? Like
Yeah.
what is how are you seeing racism in this conversation of healing and this trying to get out of this death dealing cycle?
Yeah.
Right.
So I view it absolutely as a principality. And there's a article that signed a couple of my students called Racism as Principality. It's part of a book. I think the author's name was Wiley Kellerman, Wiley-Kellerman. And part of his argument is that Christians on both political fronts, on both theological fronts, miss the idea that racism is like a spiritual superstructure, right? So it's this veil that filters a lot of evil on everyone underneath it. White, black, yellow, brown, blue, polka dot, doesn't matter. That all of us are violated by it. And so he raises this question of, how does the Bible tell us to deal with principalities? Right? And at no point does it say reconcile yourself with it. At no point does it say forgive it. Right? But that's the very thing that we do war against. And so how would it be useful to change the concept that we are doing war against racism? Right? We aren't fighting racists. We are fighting racism.
Right, right. And that doesn't mean that that interpersonal doesn't exist.
Correct.
Right? Like there is still interpersonal for those who buy into the lies of white supremacy, appropriate them, and then use those tools to support a harmful system. And so that doesn't negate that reality. But the heart of it, the root of it is that system, that structure that's perpetuated by this narrative, this lie, this sort of myth of, and within the United States, of what and who supposedly America is, that's rooted in concepts of lies of white supremacy.
This is, again, rich. Nancy shared, I'm witnessing such wisdom tonight. In Judaism, forgiveness is specifically not required if I don't want to mispronounce the word, teshuvah, repentance has not occurred. You can still forgive if no teshuvah has happened, but it isn't commanded. So in light of that and what you all have shared, then tell me, how are we supposed to distinguish then whiteness from lies of white supremacy? Or I'm sorry, whiteness and lies of white supremacy from white people? How do we distinguish in our work of doing this?
Yeah, part of it for me is, right, there is no person that is my enemy. Right. So in the extreme kind of old school version of the Nation of Islam from like World War II era to, Nixon administration, where they taught kind of this racialized theodicy that the source of black suffering is white evil and therefore they are the devil. Right. That's fighting white people. And as a Christian, we reject making any person the embodiment of evil.
Right.
Right. What we also embrace or accept is that there are ideas, right, that the Romans passage about being conformed to the image of the world. And to me, part of the conforming to the image of the world around race is this idea of whiteness and the lies of white supremacy, right? That whiteness becomes a possession that entitles you to weaponize it against people who do not look like you.
Right. Whiteness is a created commodity, invented, I want to say, commodity, in order to maintain structures of power and privilege within a certain historical and political and geographical context.
Right. Yeah, I love in the chat, someone put not even DeSantis.
Jesus Christ.
And certainly there are folk who will test that. And
I might have talked about him several times today. I saw.
Right. But part of why I think he's a great example is how different is he than Trump? How different is he than Mike Pence? Right. And so to me, they are all faces of the lie of white supremacy.
Right. And in a sense, sometimes I would say those individual faces can become distractions from the true fight. Absolutely. They become sort of false boogeymen of like, if we just get rid of them, right? It's that news station that finds that racist tweet from when the person was in the past, and then they fire that person. Okay, we've resolved. If we view it as individual, then the assumption then is we've resolved it, as opposed to this idea that there is a churning mechanism in the background that benefits some and harms others, and that those who benefit from it are less likely to take action to halt its turning.
Right. Yeah,
And I want to add.
That also goes back to uh, Nancy's earlier question about the docu-series she mentioned, right? That part of what that docu-series talks about is getting rid of the one or two public offenders didn't change the culture
Right.
of that particular institution.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as Dr. G mentioned about the boogeyman, right? How often do we say, if we just get rid of this guy, of this woman, of this person, then we will have fixed it.
Right.
But again, that person is just a poisonous fruit of a rotten tree.
Right.
And as long as we keep hacking off fruit, we never get to the toxic nature of the root system of the tree. So for me, that's part of why emphasizing kind of the lies of white supremacy or whiteness is more important, because that's the battleground.
Right.
And I wanted to just add to this conversation that, again, while we're making this distinction between white people and this whiteness of the lies of white supremacy, and making sure you all are hearing that we're saying we're talking about principalities and systems, whiteness is not something that just white people benefit from.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Absolutely. 100%.
Colorism and plenty
100%.
of other isms
100%.
are children and stepchildren of whiteness that persons who are brown benefit from because they engage and leverage the system of whiteness.
Right,
so this is why we're calling it the lies of, well, that's not why. The doctors really can tell you why, but it's a part of why the lies of white supremacy, because it is not just those who benefit from not having melanin in their skin. It is the system of supremacy, and it's the white supremacy of it. That is certainly
right.
It's a system that anybody can engage in, depending on how it's a system that you can let. And I don't want to say anybody, but if you buy into it, function in it, act in it, we're not saying just white people benefit from the system.
Right. And I want to add to that is that it's not a purely conscious process. We have two mechanisms of cognitively comprehending and interacting with the world. The majority of our way of interacting with the world is automatic and non-conscious. It's implicit. That is the vast majority of how we take in knowledge, how we use knowledge. And so this association of whiteness as being preferential is a message that's peddled perpetually, constantly for everyone. And it does not require someone to say, today I will choose to buy into this. It's that the best part of waking up is
Folgers in your cup.
If you're of a certain generation, you know it. If you're not, sorry.
I know the song.
Okay.
It came between God and light.
Right. And so that is the idea of the lie of white supremacy. It is a soundtrack that is continuously played, that gets in our minds, whether we want it to or not. And it's one of the ways that it's manifested is internalized racial oppression narratives. And so the other way is that Dr. J talks about is the racial bribe, and sort of racism or whiteness as a loan.
Right. And so this idea that, to the extent, kind of what you're saying, Dominique, to the extent to which you buy into it, then it's loaned to you. Some of the benefits are loaned to you, right? And it's important to recognize it's loaned. It is not purchased.
Correct.
So you don't own it, and it can be taken back at any time. And so that whole idea is, well, at least I'm not as bad as X, or at least I can have more power over Y, is part of those loans that, and the kind of the lies that attach to it, that we want to examine and make sure that we are not trading in them. Again, as Dr. G mentioned, because so much of this is automated, right? So that's part of, to me, the work of, of church, of therapy, of good friends, good family, to help be that mirror.
Right.
What was
right? Yeah, and starting with the assumption that the narrative has impacted and impacts us all.
Yes.
The lie impacts all, and so then what do we need to do to be aware of that, conscious of it, and fight it?
That's why I was going to, that is a perfect segue to the question. Hailing from, sitting from the state of Texas, where legislation has been passed to in some way cease and end diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging programs, but more specifically, critical race theory, teaching teaching from the lens of diversity and difference.
Right.
What role do you believe education, what should we be studying to combat these systems, educate ourselves, become more aware? What is you all suggestion? What's your biblical prescription?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. This is it's a battle for the story. What is the true story? And all these bans are to perpetuate the myths, the lie of white supremacy. Because if folk don't learn about America's oppressive history and present practices, and researchers have studied this, folks are less likely to support any type of redress, any type of remedy for unfairness. There is a bias that individuals have of the world is just how it should be. The world just is that way. People get what they deserve and they have what they deserve. And the less access to true history, the more people have that belief. And so it is such a deliberate and clear effort to enhance the lie of white supremacy with these efforts to ban teaching. What I really want to see them do is to say that, which I haven't seen anyone do yet, is to say what we're trying to do is ban anti-racism.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want them to say. Notice, like they're saying we're banning DEI, we're banning critical race theory. No one's saying we're banning anti-racism. Why? Because if they say that, then they're saying they're pro-racism. And that's sort of one of the core fears of like, oh no, you're not saying I'm racist, are you? That's really what I want us to start to push back and say. So basically you're banning anti-racism to make folks say like, to run away from that.
Should I take your advice and start doing that here in Texas? You all make some space in your house.
I was going to say, we might actually have to put in a room for you if you do that.
Exactly.
But as far as the teaching goes, it's being a part of efforts of really teaching the true history of the nation. I think that is critical because researchers have also found when folk learn the true history, they are more likely to support actually addressing it. Those who don't know about racism in the past are more likely to deny it in the present. And we could think about the ways in which history books contribute to that narrative. And so I think that's one effort that we would support.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and when you raise the question about kind of the Bible, one of the things that I love about the Bible is that it doesn't hide the nation's history.
Right.
Just about every single person in the Bible, you get them warts and all, right? And so one of the things that Gail had mentioned, and I saw Darlene just flash across your screen about the battle for the story, right? What we know is that the story shapes identity.
Absolutely.
And so if I can control the story, I can control who you are. And that is part of what the battle's about. Right, that's part of what some of our research overlaps, is what's at stake in the story is who you say you are. And so one of the things that becomes a challenge for America on these kind of racial questions is when you see the problems with Black folk in particular, either there's something deficient in us and America is innocent, or we are fine and America is guilty of sabotaging us.
Right.
And all of the kind of opposition to racism or anti-racist work, which gets masked in DEI initiatives being banned, critical race theory, which again, for the love of all that is holy, is not critical race theory as they're defining it.
Right.
You raised your voice. Wow, go ahead.
No, it's always...
Right. As an attorney, I know that vexes you.
Yeah. I've gotten much better in my more advanced years, but the thing that would just always set me off is illogical, wicked idiocy. Like when you're illogical,
wicked idiocy,
you're wicked, and it's just dumb.
But you don't like just plain. I mean, but you're okay with just plain dummies.
Yeah, if you're just plain dumb, we can help you with that.
Right. We can work with you. illogical, wicked,
Wicked.
idiocy.
Right. I
Got
just don't. I just don't. Right. Um, so the students often talk about how, and we did in one of our first podcasts about kind of the various ways to curse in Hebrew
it.
that
Yes.
appears in Scripture. This
Yes.
is one of those moments where I would like to invoke those words. And it's like, since God uses, I feel like it's okay for me to use
I know that's
them.
right.
So in that, so when that happens for me, then it's just a matter of just recognizing what's really being contested,
Hmm.
right? Which is our identity.
Mm.
And so if America is guilty, which is what history teaches, then you cannot sustain the lie that America is a meritocracy,
Right.
that America is this great Christian nation that has
Mm.
just been the answer to God's wildest dreams. And that becomes part of the battleground.
Right. Right.
And again, if you buy into that myth, the opposition, the Ron DeSantis makes perfect sense.
Right.
He is the inevitable result of the lie.
Right. Reminded me one of the I referenced this earlier today in class. A historian that we came across recently pointed out that the images of God as white increased significantly after the Civil War. And the argument is that there was a fear that Black folk would appeal to God for retaliation and for justice. So instead, if they shifted it to make it appear that God was on the side of the oppressor, then again it would support this narrative. Then that the position is fixed, is even ordained by God.
Mm. Mm. And that alone will take me off on a whole preaching tangent, because it is all about who controls the story, how you present
Right.
the story, the narrative, the rhetoric, all used behind the story.
Right.
All this has played a role in all of the systems that we are even talking about today, and the ways in which those who found themselves in privilege and power have dominated it, the narrative and the conversation.
Mhm.
And so we have shared a lot with you all, our dear beloved siblings who have joined us this evening, as our two wonderful Doctors G and J Kemp close us out with some closing thoughts. I want to just remind either one of the Kemps to remind us all of that resource you dropped on us, the trauma audio book, or the trauma book. Can you just remind us?
Yes. So the title of the book is Healing Racial Trauma by Sheila Wise Rowe.
Okay. All right. Healing Racial Trauma by Sheila
Wise Rowe, ROWE.
All right, everybody, you all got those resources. Again, we thank you all for joining this conversation. We talked about some things, we clowned. Y'all make sure you go look for that Raisin Bran commercial with the packing of the suitcase. You all remember that Dr. G did not embezzle anything but Monopoly money. You all remember that Dr. J came for her, but they immediately reconciled because it was appropriate. Please remember that if you're going to a stack in Uno, then you might want to go ahead and trademark cite Dr. J for his now Midtown process if you're going to play Bid Whiz. We've had a lot that we discussed today. Again, what we're saying is stay true to your journey of healing. Continue to seek God for yourself. And we believe if we start doing that as individuals, prayerfully, this culture, these systems that are at play will come to an end and a cease. So Dr. G, give us some final thoughts, and then Dr. J will be closing us out.
Yeah, I think that piece that you were talking about earlier related to self was something that I know we didn't spend as much time on, but I think that's something that we all have to be careful of. There is an automatic tendency and motivation to blame victims for the experiences that they have, and we can turn that automatic tendency on ourselves and blame ourselves for hurts and harms that we've experienced. And so I often say the world is harsh enough. Let us not join in the world's harshness and attacking ourselves. And so not joining in that attack, but instead embracing a perspective of compassion for ourselves. So that is what I will leave you all with.
Exactly. Yeah. And one last thing I'll add, kind of on this theme of the world has enough harsh critics, don't join in that chorus. One of my favorite benedictions was by a pastor who passed away now probably 10, 15 years ago. But he would always end his services by quoting passage from the Gospel of John, which is, when others have called you servants, remember that Jesus has called you friend. And in the strength of that friendship, may we go to live, to love, and to serve. And for me, when we talk about the story, particularly as a Christian, what is Christ's verdict? What is Christ's story of you? And for me, learning Christ's story is that first step in healing. I think that's one of the geniuses that kind of African American religious tradition, and particularly musical tradition, provides us, is that constant reaffirmation of Christ's verdict, right? The old spiritual that you sometimes may have heard during this past month, and you may hear during 4th of July about, oh, freedom, right? And that puzzling line of, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave. And so what does it mean at that stage that they were enslaved but never viewed themselves as slaves? To me, that's part of the genius and the power of, no matter what others say, what has Christ said about you? Right? Or as my grandma would say, whose you are determines who you are. And so that would be my last thought on that piece. As we wrap up this evening, as always, have to thank my family, Dr. G and the Reverend Dr. Dominique Robinson, for joining us. I also want to thank all of you. As I've said before, I don't have strangers, just family I haven't met yet. So I want to thank all of you for taking time out to watch with us and to rock with us on the serious, the deep, the playful, and the ridiculous at times. So that's a nice full life. If you laugh, you cry, you think you've had a good day. So we hope that this hour together has been a part of that good day. As always, please make sure you connect with us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at jl.institute. You can also find us on Facebook at jl.institute as well. Please visit our website at www.jelinstitute.institute. Again, www.jl.institute, to find out kind of some of the new exciting things that are happening. Stay current on our podcasts, which are available on all major platforms. So please subscribe so you don't miss any notifications when new things come out. And as we close, I want to remind you kind of how we started today with the question of Goel. So remember, as followers of Christ, who is our Goel, we serve the ultimate Redeemer, who both redeemed us through his blood and grants us the Holy Spirit, who provides us, as you now know, our familiar refrain, with just enough light for the step we are on. So as Juneteenth ends and we get ready to celebrate Independence Day, may you walk in the light of God's word and the light that he provides for this step. God bless you all. Have a good night. We'll see you next time on Masterclass Moments with Dr. Joel B. Kemp.